Welcome back. In the darkest corridors of the Ministry of Love, Winston is no longer fighting the party. He is fighting to remember who he is. In these 2 chapters, Orwell takes us beyond physical pain and into the terrifying precision of psychological control. Truth is twisted, memory is erased, and love becomes betrayal. What happens when even the voice inside your mind no longer belongs to you? Stay close. This is where the soul begins to unravel. Winston found himself strapped to a high, rigid bed in a place flooded with artificial light, unable to move. He floated up into awareness as though from a deep, submerged world, an existence beneath thought and time. Since his arrest, the passing of time had become unknowable. Darkness and daylight no longer alternated. Memories were fractured. Gaps existed between moments of pain and moments of blackness, and he could not say whether the voids in between lasted seconds or days. The horror had begun with a single blow to his elbow, so ordinary in appearance, yet it marked the end of reality as he knew it. That first moment of physical pain shattered not only his body but his resolve. What followed was a series of interrogations, beatings, and tortures so brutal, so prolonged, that they blurred into one another. Fists, truncheons, boots, rods. Winston was beaten by multiple men at once. The violence was not about extracting truth. It was about dismantling identity. He howled, crawled, and wept like an animal. He confessed quickly and frequently, not always out of guilt, but to forestall the next wave of agony. At times, he thought he would die. At other times, he wished he could lose consciousness and was tormented by the cruelty of staying awake. He confessed to every crime imaginable: treason, espionage, sabotage, even murdering his wife, though she was still alive. It was easier to agree, to give them everything, even things he had never done, even things that could never be true. The line between truth and falsehood became irrelevant under the heel of pain. What mattered was survival. Over time, the physical beatings became less common. In their place came something more insidious: psychological demolition. No longer assaulted by thugs, Winston now faced party intellectuals, men in glasses, small, quick, methodical. They worked in shifts, interrogating him for hours, not to uncover facts, but to erase resistance. They inflicted smaller, constant humiliations, slapping his face, wringing his ears, shining lights into his eyes. But the true weapon was the endless questioning, the twisting of logic, the undermining of memory, the insistence that he betray even his own understanding of reality. During these sessions, Winston wept often, not from pain, but from shame, from helplessness, from a sense that something precious inside him was dissolving. He tried in vain to hold on to some fragment of the truth, but it became easier to simply say what they wanted to hear. He became a shell, a voice, a pen, a vessel for whatever the party demanded. He confessed to being in contact with Goldstein. He confessed that everyone he had ever known was part of the conspiracy. It did not matter that these confessions weren't true. They had become true in the eyes of the party. Thought and action were one and the same. Belief and memory were interchangeable. If he had thought it, he had done it. If the party said it had happened, then it had. Amid the blur of torture and submission, Winston's mind occasionally wandered into surreal episodes, disconnected memories, dreams, sensations. He remembered a room with nothing but a pair of glowing eyes and a slow ticking sound. He recalled a corridor full of golden light where he confessed freely, shouting with joy alongside O'Brien, Julia, and others. It was as if, in surrender, a certain kind of peace had been offered, a terrible relief. Throughout it all, O'Brien was ever present, even when unseen. Winston had always felt that it was O'Brien who controlled the flow of pain, the rhythm of rest and torment. He became a father figure, a teacher, a god of cruelty and compassion. O'Brien whispered to him once in a dream, "You are in my keeping. I shall save you." I shall make you perfect. It was the same voice from Winston's earlier dream. 7 years ago, the voice that had said, "We shall meet in the place where there is no darkness." Eventually, Winston regained partial awareness in a new room. He lay on his back, restrained at every major point of his body, unable to move. O'Brien was beside him, looking down with a strangely gentle sorrow. Under his hand, a dial, marked to 100. Without warning, pain flooded Winston's body. It felt as if his joints were being torn apart. Worse than the pain was the fear that his spine would break. O'Brien, calmly observing, said, "You are afraid your backbone will snap." He released the dial. The pain vanished as quickly as it had come. O'Brien explained the rules. The dial would deliver pain at any level he chose. Any lie, any deviation from truth, party truth, would be punished. Winston nodded. Yes, he understood. Then came the lessons. O'Brien told Winston that he suffered from a defective memory, from a mental illness. He believed things that had never happened. His memories were false. He was not sane, but the party could cure him. He simply had to accept their reality. When asked whom Oceania was at war with, Winston hesitated. O'Brien pushed the dial forward, triggering another wave of pain. Winston was forced to concede. Oceania was, and had always been, at war with East Asia. Next came the photograph. The image Winston had once held, proof that the party lied about the past. O'Brien produced it, then destroyed it instantly. It never existed, he said. Winston protested. It exists in memory. But O'Brien replied, I do not remember it. That was doublethink, the concept that something could simultaneously be true and untrue, remembered and forgotten. O'Brien pressed further. Does the past exist? Winston responded, in records, in memory. And O'Brien explained that the party controls both. Therefore, the party controls the past. Reality, he said, is not external. It exists only in the collective mind of the party, not in private thoughts, which do I, only in the immortal will of the party. Finally, O'Brien raised the most terrifying test. He held up 4 fingers. How many, Winston? 4, Winston replied. O'Brien inflicted pain until Winston screamed, 5, 4, anything you want. Still, O'Brien was not satisfied. He didn't want Winston to say 5. He wanted him to believe it. Winston sobbed, clung to O'Brien like a child. He was terrified, broken, yet part of him still clung to rationality. How can I help seeing what's in front of my eyes? He wept. 2 and 2 are 4. O'Brien calmly replied, sometimes, Winston, sometimes they are 5. Sometimes they are 3. You must try harder. It is not easy to become sane. Then came the injections. Blissful warmth spread through Winston's body. The pain eased. He looked up at O'Brien, no longer with fear, but with affection. Love, not for a friend, but for the one who understood him. Perhaps, he thought, we don't want to be loved so much as to be understood. Now Winston was permitted to ask questions. About Julia, she had betrayed him instantly. About Big Brother, he exists, O'Brien said, as the embodiment of the party. About the Brotherhood, he would never know if it existed. And finally, Winston asked the one question that lived in the heart of his fear. What is in room 101? O'Brien answered simply, you know what is in room 101, Winston. Everyone knows what is in room 101. The session ended with another injection. Darkness claimed him again. The chapter begins not with words, but with sensations. A body strapped down, a face drenched in harsh light, a figure hovering nearby. Winston is no longer a man of thought, but a vessel awaiting instruction. His freedom of movement, both physical and mental, utterly removed. The passage, he was lying on something that felt like a camp bed, except that it was higher off the ground and that he was fixed down in some way, sets the tone for the entire chapter. One of helplessness, control, and forced surrender. Here, Orwell introduces the concept of the self as something that can be physically restrained in order to be intellectually reshaped. Winston's disorientation, swimming up into a reality he cannot name, evokes the image of rebirth, but not into freedom. Rather, it's a descent into a meticulously controlled psychological prison. His memory, fractured and unreliable, mirrors the party's manipulation of historical truth. There had been times when consciousness had stopped dead and started again after a blank interval. This subtle fragmentation reflects a deeper question. If memory is broken, can identity persist? Orwell begins the slow dissolution of the individual mind with these quiet ruptures in time. The torture that follows is not just physical punishment, it is a ritual designed to reduce Winston to the most primal, malleable form of himself. The violence, described in detail, dehumanizes both victim and perpetrator. Orwell writes, "There were times when he rolled about the floor as shameless as an animal." Through this, he reveals that totalitarianism doesn't just destroy bodies, it destroys dignity. Pain is not only a method of confession, but a tool of moral erosion. Yet even in agony, there are moments when Winston tries to assert control. 3 more kicks, 2 more kicks, and then I will tell them what they want. This internal monologue reveals the faint flicker of human autonomy. He bargains with his pain, thinking perhaps he can outlast the torture just enough to surrender on his own terms. But Orwell demonstrates how even this resistance is gradually worn down, how autonomy crumbles not in one instant, but over countless indistinct hours. As the physical torture gives way to psychological interrogation, a more insidious form of control emerges. The new interrogators are party intellectuals, methodical and cruel in their logic. They do not need fists. They rely on humiliation, on relentless questioning, on the annihilation of the rational mind. Orwell's insight is clear. Brute force breaks the body, but it is language, twisted and turned, that breaks the soul. The goal, Orwell makes clear, is not to extract truth, but to collapse it. Their real weapon was the merciless questioning, convicting him at every step of lies and self-contradiction. This process mirrors real-world techniques of psychological warfare, where repetition and contradiction are used not to reveal reality, but to annihilate it. The lesson here is chilling. When words lose meaning, the mind becomes defenseless. By the time Winston confesses to crimes both imagined and impossible, murdering his wife, conspiring with Goldstein, admiring capitalism, truth has ceased to matter. Orwell emphasizes it was easier to confess everything and implicate everybody. This is not just a collapse of factual reality, it is the birth of a new party-defined truth. In a world where thought and deed are indistinguishable, the individual becomes irrelevant. Surreal memories punctuate the chapter like dreams inside nightmares. In one, Winston finds himself in a vast corridor, confessing joyfully. The absurdity of this moment, laughing with his torturers, reveals a deeper horror, the joy of surrender. Orwell warns that under enough pressure, even the soul can learn to celebrate its own defeat. This hallucinatory peace is not healing. It is the erasure of resistance. The figure of O'Brien grows increasingly complex. No longer just the interrogator, he becomes Winston's spiritual guide. He was the tormentor, he was the protector, he was the inquisitor, he was the friend. In this paradox lies Orwell's most terrifying idea, the abuser who teaches love. Through O'Brien, the party makes obedience feel like salvation. Winston doesn't just obey, he believes. When Winston is strapped again beneath the dial, Orwell intensifies the moral stakes. O'Brien says, "You are afraid that your backbone will snap." The fear here is not metaphorical, it is biological, but it reflects a deeper fear, that the spine, the symbol of resolve and uprightness, will give way. And when it does, the person collapses not just physically, but morally. As O'Brien shifts from brute torture to philosophical debate, he engages in what Orwell calls the ultimate assault on sanity, redefining reality. Reality exists in the human mind and nowhere else, only in the mind of the party. With these words, Orwell dismantles the concept of objective truth. If reality is party-defined, then rebellion becomes not only dangerous, but meaningless. This theme crystallizes in the famous finger scene. O'Brien holds up 4 fingers, demanding Winston see 5. At first, Winston resists. 4! What else can I say? But resistance brings pain. Eventually, Winston shouts, 5, 4, anything you like, only stop it. The lesson is brutal. The body, under enough pressure, will surrender the mind. Truth, like morality, is a luxury pain cannot afford. And then, almost cruelly, Orwell gives Winston a moment of comfort. O'Brien's arm around his shoulders becomes a grotesque parody of care. Winston is comforted by the man who has destroyed him. This, Orwell warns, is the most dangerous form of power. Not the kind that rules by fear, but the kind that teaches the victim to love their oppressor. When asked what the party truly wants, O'Brien responds with terrifying clarity. We do not merely destroy our enemies, we change them. Unlike the Inquisition or the totalitarians of the past, the party will not allow the dignity of a martyr. They destroy not only the body but the soul. Winston must become one of them, not just in words, but in belief before he dies. The final psychological breaking point comes when Winston is forced to question not just facts, but existence itself. When asked whether Big Brother exists, O'Brien replies, "You do not exist." This denial of identity is more than rhetoric. It is a warning. In a world where only the collective mind is real, the individual is a ghost. Orwell is asking us to consider, what is the price of denying objective reality? By the chapter's end, Winston has lost even his certainty about Room 101, the place of ultimate fear. He does not ask what is there, only admits that he already knows. The surrender is total. Orwell leaves us with a final haunting truth. In a world of absolute control, torture is not punishment. It is conversion. The goal is not to make you obey, it is to make you believe. And perhaps the most terrifying lesson of all is this: given enough pain, anyone can. Winston's transformation continues under the quiet, methodical instruction of O'Brien. Orwell does not rush the moment of surrender. Instead, he lingers on the psychology of defeat, emphasizing that true submission is not achieved through a single act of torture, but through the systematic erosion of identity, memory, and reason. When Winston is asked about Oceania's war history and hesitates to confirm the party's fabricated timeline, O'Brien presses him with a gentle but firm insistence. This is where Orwell introduces the terrifying effectiveness of internalized control. It's not enough for Winston to say what the party wants. He must believe it. As O'Brien puts it, you are mentally deranged. You suffer from a defective memory. Here, Orwell frames dissent not as rebellion, but as illness, suggesting that in a fully totalitarian world, sanity itself is defined by conformity. The pivotal moment arrives when Winston is shown a piece of undeniable evidence: the photograph of the 3 men he knew were innocent. For a brief instant, he experiences what Orwell calls luminous certainty. But this too is stripped from him. O'Brien destroys the photograph and tells Winston it does not exist. It never existed. With this act, Orwell underscores the party's absolute control over history and truth. If memory is fallible and records are alterable, then reality becomes whatever the party says it is. What follows is not just physical collapse, but epistemological collapse. Winston begins to doubt the very act of knowing. He can no longer trust what he sees, what he remembers, what he feels. When asked how many fingers O'Brien is holding up, Winston is eventually forced to say, "I don't know." It is not only an admission of defeat, but an admission that the boundary between reality and falsehood has been erased. In these final stages of re-education, Orwell paints a haunting portrait of psychological colonization. O'Brien speaks like a priest, offering salvation through surrender. We do not merely destroy our enemies, we change them. The party's goal is to eliminate the individual not through violence, but through love, by making the victim love the system that crushes him. This notion culminates in one of the novel's most devastating insights. We shall squeeze you empty, and then we shall fill you with ourselves. Orwell warns that when power is total, the concept of the self ceases to matter. The party does not just demand loyalty, it demands identity. The result is not simply obedience, it is the annihilation of inner life. By the end of this harrowing chapter, Winston is no longer trying to resist. He is trying to see 5 fingers where there are 4. He is trying to make truth conform to power. And when he fails, he does not fight back. He thanks O'Brien. Perhaps one did not want to be loved so much as to be understood. This line carries an unbearable sadness, capturing the deepest human need, connection. But in Orwell's world, even that need is weaponized. The lesson, finally, is not only political, but existential. Orwell is asking, what happens to a soul when its truth is taken away? What becomes of humanity when suffering no longer has meaning, when language no longer has structure, when memory no longer has anchors? In totalitarianism, Orwell teaches us, the greatest crime is not rebellion, it is remembering. In the heart of the Ministry of Love, Winston finds himself at the mercy of O'Brien, the enigmatic and intellectual figure who now fully reveals his role as an agent of the party. What unfolds is not merely a physical interrogation, but a chilling psychological dismantling of Winston's understanding of truth, memory, and self. The chapter begins with O'Brien displaying a seemingly insignificant slip of newspaper. But for Winston, it is everything. It is the photograph he once held in his hands, definitive proof that the party had lied about the past. It showed Jones, Aronson, and Rutherford, the 3 supposed traitors, at a party event in New York, contradicting their forced confessions. The photograph had appeared to Winston by accident over a decade ago and was immediately destroyed. Now, to his shock, O'Brien shows it to him for a fleeting moment before burning it in the memory hole. It exists! Winston shouts in defiance, but O'Brien simply replies, no, it does not exist. It never existed. With that gesture, O'Brien eradicates the physical evidence and denies the very act of its appearance, declaring that history is what the party says it is. No more, no less. This moment is a turning point for Winston. He begins to experience the full weight of doublethink, the party's method of holding 2 contradictory beliefs simultaneously. O'Brien pushes him further, asking Winston to recite the party slogan, "Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past." The lesson is simple and brutal. The party alone dictates reality, and reality exists only in the mind of the party. Truth in this terrifying context is not an objective constant, but whatever the party chooses it to be at any given moment. Winston tries to argue that memory and records can preserve truth, but O'Brien counters with clinical coldness. The party, he says, controls all records and all human memories. Therefore, it controls the past absolutely. The implication is devastating. Even memory, personal, inner, involuntary, is subject to the will of the party. Winston insists that he still remembers, that he has not surrendered his mind. But O'Brien's reply cuts deep. Winston is here because he failed to submit, to discipline his thoughts, and to humble himself before the party. His crime is the belief in objective reality, a belief that O'Brien insists must be destroyed. To illustrate the totalitarian grip of the party on truth and perception, O'Brien begins one of the most harrowing parts of Winston's torture. He raises his hand and shows 4 fingers. "How many fingers am I holding up, Winston?" Winston responds honestly, 4. But when O'Brien insists that the party says it is 5 and demands Winston agree, the torture begins. Electric pain, overwhelming and paralyzing, floods Winston's body whenever he refuses to lie. The dial climbs from 55 to 60 and beyond, each increment increasing the agony until Winston screams, pleads, and finally blurts out conflicting answers. 4, 5, anything to stop the pain. Yet O'Brien is not interested in mere compliance. He wants belief. He accuses Winston of lying even when he says 5, because deep down, Winston still sees 4. In a moment of despair and torment, Winston is temporarily released, physically weakened and mentally broken. O'Brien comforts him like a parent, his arm around Winston's shoulders, and for a haunting moment, Winston feels gratitude, even love, for his torturer. It is a disturbing portrayal of trauma bonding, where the victim clings to the abuser for relief. O'Brien, sensing this vulnerability, presses further. He tells Winston, "You are a slow learner," and adds that sanity is not seeing things for what they are, but seeing them as the party sees them. Sometimes 2 and 2 are 4. Sometimes they are 5. Sometimes they are all of them at once. Winston is told he must try harder to see what the party demands he see. Another round of torture follows. The pain increases, the numbers on the dial climbing, until Winston can no longer distinguish between 4 and 5. The fingers blur into forests, a surreal hallucination in which Winston can no longer trust his own perception. When asked again how many fingers he sees, he finally cries, "I don't know. You will kill me if you do that again. 4, 5, 6, in all honesty, I don't know." O'Brien's voice softens in response, acknowledging this is better. A needle is injected into Winston's arm, and warm, soothing relief spreads through his body. For a fleeting moment, the torture is over. In the aftermath of the pain, Winston looks at O'Brien with a kind of reverence. Despite all that has occurred, or perhaps because of it, he feels deeply connected to O'Brien. It is not friendship, not love, but a powerful sense of understanding. O'Brien, in Winston's eyes, becomes the only person capable of hearing and understanding him, even if he is the one destroying him. This paradox, love for the torturer, intimacy with the executioner, defines the brutal psychological manipulation Winston is undergoing. O'Brien, ever calm and in control, then begins to reframe Winston's entire concept of imprisonment. When asked why the party brings people to the ministry of love, Winston offers the usual answers: to make them confess, to punish them. But O'Brien emphatically denies this. To cure you, he says, to make you sane. The party is not merely seeking confession or punishment. Its true goal is transformation, not the destruction of the body, but the annihilation and reconstitution of the mind. O'Brien explains that the party is not concerned with actions, but with thoughts. Thought crime is not something to be punished, but something to be eradicated. And the only way to do that is through absolute control, not only of the outer world, but of the inner self. The party does not destroy its enemies, it changes them. And Winston, like all others brought to the ministry of love, will not leave until he has been cured. Well, this chapter, one of the most psychologically intense in the entire novel, showcases the terrifying power of totalitarian control, not just over speech or behavior, but over reality itself. Through pain, fear, and manipulation, Winston is brought to the edge of surrender. The line between truth and lie, between perception and delusion, between love and fear is deliberately blurred. The party seeks not just obedience, but belief, not just control, but devotion. And in this bleak world, where even the number of fingers can be debated, the ultimate power lies not in violence, but in the destruction and reformation of the mind. In the quiet dread of the ministry of love, Orwell leads the reader into one of the most haunting episodes of 1984. Here, Winston is not merely a prisoner of the party, he is a man on trial for his very perception of truth. It begins with a simple object, a slip of newspaper. For Winston, it is everything. The photograph he glimpses between O'Brien's fingers is not just evidence of party lies, but a relic of sanity. It exists, he cries, as though naming reality might preserve it. But O'Brien, with terrifying nonchalance, destroys it. Ashes, he says, not even identifiable ashes. Dust. It does not exist. It never existed. This exchange is not about paper or even history. It is about power. O'Brien's actions show the extent to which truth can be unmade in a world ruled by tyranny. The moment encapsulates Orwell's chilling thesis. When control of records and memory lies with the state, the past becomes fiction. The truth then is not discovered or preserved. It is manufactured. Winston's desperate assertion that he remembers the photograph is quickly dismissed. O'Brien replies, "I do not remember it," with a calm that is more horrifying than denial. Winston is not merely battling a liar. He is battling the erasure of reality itself. If memory can be rewritten, what can remain of the self? He senses this, and the helplessness sinks in. It is a moment of philosophical defeat, one that touches on Orwell's deeper message. When belief is coerced, existence itself becomes uncertain. O'Brien then invokes a party slogan: "Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past." He guides Winston through a metaphysical discussion on the nature of existence. Does the past exist in concrete space? Winston responds, no. Then where does it exist? In records, in the mind, in human memories. O'Brien agrees and then delivers the fatal blow. The party controls all records and memories. Therefore, the party controls the past. The implications are terrifying. If no one can independently verify what happened yesterday, then yesterday is whatever the powerful say it was. In his anguish, Winston insists that memory is involuntary, that it cannot be controlled. But O'Brien's retort is damning. You have not controlled it. That is what has brought you here. Winston's crime is not his memory, it is his failure to make it submissive. In the party's worldview, sanity is not clarity, but conformity. O'Brien explains that reality exists only in the mind and not in the individuals, which is flawed and perishable, but in the mind of the party, which is collective and immortal. This is where Orwell's genius shines. He does not rely on futuristic gadgets to illustrate dystopia. Instead, he explores something more intimate and terrifying: the colonization of thought. When O'Brien says, whatever the party holds to be the truth is truth, he is not simply stating dogma. He is teaching Winston that personal perception is irrelevant. The only truth that matters is the one sanctioned by authority. The lesson deepens when O'Brien holds up 4 fingers and asks Winston, "How many fingers am I holding up?" Winston, seeing 4, says so, but O'Brien demands that he sees 5, because the party says so. With every refusal, Winston is punished. The pain escalates with each act of defiance. Eventually, Winston cries out, 4, 5, 4, anything you like. Only stop it. Stop the pain. Here, Orwell shows us the collapse of certainty not through debate, but through suffering. Under unbearable torment, Winston's clarity crumbles. He no longer knows what is real, and that is precisely what the party wants. Not submission in words, but the destruction of the self. This scene is about more than torture. It is about the fragility of belief under pressure. The human mind, when subjected to enough pain, will begin to doubt even the things it once knew without question. Winston eventually begs, "I would see 5 if I could. I am trying to see 5. This is the moment Orwell has been building toward. Winston's slow realization that survival might depend not on truth, but on the ability to believe whatever he is told. And then, in the most disturbing twist of all, Winston feels comfort. After a particularly intense session, O'Brien cradles him. He clung to O'Brien like a baby, the text tells us. Winston's gratitude is not just a reaction to the end of pain, it is a psychological dependency. O'Brien, who inflicts suffering, also becomes the only source of relief. Winston begins to feel love for the man who is breaking him. This trauma bonding reflects one of Orwell's darkest insights. In a world devoid of kindness, even cruelty, when paired with gentleness, can feel like care. O'Brien then brings Winston back to his diary. Freedom is the freedom to say that 2 + 2 make 4. This is the line Winston once wrote with pride. But now O'Brien replies, sometimes they are 5, sometimes they are 3, sometimes they are all of them at once. Truth, once so simple, is now fluid. In Orwell's nightmare, mathematics itself, arguably the most stable pillar of knowledge, can be twisted into submission. The goal is not to argue Winston out of his beliefs. It is to make him doubt the very nature of reality. Eventually, Winston reaches the most fragile state of all. He says, I don't know. You will kill me if you do that again. 4, 5, 6. In all honesty, I don't know. And here O'Brien says, better. Not because Winston now sees 5, but because he no longer trusts his own eyes. The goal is not conversion, it is collapse. To soothe him, a needle is administered. Warmth spreads through Winston's body, the pain fades. And looking at O'Brien, Winston feels affection. This is Orwell's final cruelty. Winston, so deeply broken, no longer cares if O'Brien is his enemy. What matters is that he is someone who understands. Perhaps one did not want to be loved so much as to be understood, the narration says. It is a profound observation about loneliness under tyranny. Even in the face of death, Winston seeks connection, even with the hand that tortures him. Finally, O'Brien asks Winston if he knows why he is here. At first, Winston replies with the obvious, to make us confess, then to punish us. But O'Brien's reply is chilling, to cure you, to make you sane. In the party's view, Winston is not a prisoner. He is a patient. His resistance is not criminal, it is pathological. We do not merely destroy our enemies, O'Brien explains, we change them. This is Orwell's greatest warning. The most dangerous tyranny is not that which kills the body, but that which rewrites the soul. In the end, what do we learn? Orwell is not merely describing a world of surveillance or torture. He is unveiling the anatomy of control. How regimes can bend not only actions but belief, not only language but thought. Winston's journey is not just physical, it is existential. It asks us to reflect. What is truth and who has the right to define it? If memory can be altered, if perception can be bent, then truth is no longer a shared ground but a weapon. Orwell's message is simple but urgent. We must guard truth not only in facts, but in our capacity to see them, speak them, and believe them. Because once the world can make you say that 2 + 2 = 5 and believe it, then there is nothing left that cannot be taken. As Winston's identity begins to disintegrate under pressure, Orwell does not let the reader look away. The Ministry of Love is not just a setting, it is a crucible, a place where human beings are not merely broken but remade. And what's most frightening is that this remaking is presented as healing. To cure you, to make you sane, O'Brien says. The implication is clear. Resistance to the party is not rebellion, but madness. Sanity in this dystopia is not defined by logic or reason, but by obedience. Winston's earlier belief that freedom is the freedom to say that 2 + 2 make 4 was in fact a quiet act of defiance. It was his way of affirming the existence of a shared, objective truth. But Orwell suggests that in a world of totalitarian power, even such simple truths become dangerous. They are no longer accepted as neutral facts, but interpreted as signs of disloyalty. The lesson here is painfully simple. In systems built on domination, truth itself becomes treason. This leads us to one of the most significant philosophical questions posed in the chapter. What is reality? Winston believed that reality was external, objective, and observable. But O'Brien methodically dismantles this belief. Reality exists in the human mind and nowhere else, not in the individual mind, only in the mind of the party. With that, Orwell flips the reader's assumptions upside down. Reality, once thought of as something to be discovered, becomes something to be dictated. And if reality can be dictated, then so can morality. O'Brien's logic, frighteningly coherent within the party system, implies that what is right or wrong is irrelevant. There is only what is believed and enforced by power. The past, the truth, even the laws of mathematics, none of them are fixed. They are as changeable as the party needs them to be. This should leave readers with an unsettling realization. Totalitarianism does not merely control what people do. It seeks to control what they are. The aim is not merely to silence, but to internalize obedience. O'Brien doesn't want Winston to parrot lies. He wants him to believe them. He doesn't want submission out of fear, but out of conviction. And when Winston finally says, "I don't know," he has reached that liminal state between confusion and acceptance, where truth no longer matters. Only survival does. There is also a deep emotional undercurrent running through this entire scene. The tenderness Winston feels for O'Brien, his torturer, points to a devastating psychological truth. When someone has the power to give or withhold all comfort, the lines between love, fear, and dependence blur. Orwell seems to be warning that in such a world, even our most sacred emotions, trust, connection, even love, can be reprogrammed and weaponized. In modern psychological terms, this mirrors the phenomenon of Stockholm Syndrome, where captives form emotional bonds with their captors. But in 1984, it goes further. The captor doesn't just earn sympathy, he becomes a sole source of meaning. And so Winston clings to O'Brien not because he forgives him, but because he has nothing else left. The chilling beauty of Orwell's writing lies in its subtlety. He does not present O'Brien as a raving monster. O'Brien is articulate, composed, even caring in tone. He offers philosophical debates rather than shouting matches. And that's precisely what makes him terrifying. He represents the seductive nature of absolute power, the kind that convinces you it is helping you as it destroys you. As readers, we are left to ask, how does one resist such power? If truth is mutable, if love can be confused with fear, if reality itself can be bent, what tools remain to defend oneself? Orwell doesn't offer easy answers. Instead, he forces us to reflect on the conditions that allow such systems to flourish in the first place. When critical thinking is replaced with loyalty, when memory is outsourced to authority, when the individual no longer believes in their own experience, that is when freedom truly dies. And perhaps the most haunting part of all is that Winston's story is not exceptional, it is ordinary. He is not a hero in the conventional sense. He is simply a man who tried to hold on to his sense of what was real. And even he, under enough pressure, was made to break. So what can we take away from this as a lesson? We learn that safeguarding truth is a moral responsibility. Not just big truths, but small ones. The kind we see with our own eyes, the kind we know in our hearts. We learn that freedom begins with the right to speak these truths aloud, even if they are as simple as 2 + 2 = 4. We also learn that the health of a society is measured not by its slogans, but by its willingness to let people think freely, even when those thoughts are inconvenient to those in power. Finally, we are reminded that love, understanding, and connection must be rooted in honesty, not fear. When those lines are blurred, we risk losing not only our freedom, but our humanity. In closing, Orwell's warning echoes clearly across time. The most dangerous regimes are those that ask not just for your silence, but for your soul. The fight for truth is not a matter of philosophy, it is a matter of survival. And the moment we surrender our grip on the real, even in small ways, is the moment we begin to lose everything. Let us then guard that grip. Let us remember that truth matters, that memory matters, that our minds, untouched by tyranny, are the last refuge of what it means to be free. In the bleak confines of the Ministry of Love, Winston undergoes one of the most harrowing transformations depicted in Orwell's 1984. As the chapter opens, he lies restrained, physically broken, and emotionally disoriented. While O'Brien leans over him, his face enlarged by proximity and distorted by fanaticism. Winston's fear is no longer of physical pain alone, but of what O'Brien represents. A man who does not simply torture the body, but seeks to obliterate the self. O'Brien's monologue is chilling in its composure. He explains that the party does not make martyrs. Unlike past regimes such as the Inquisition or the totalitarian purges of the 20th century, the party understands that external punishment is not enough. Previous tyrannies failed because they left their victims spiritually defiant. Their enemies died unbroken, and history turned them into symbols of resistance. The party, O'Brien declares, will not repeat that mistake. They do not kill the heretic while he still believes. Instead, they convert him fully, erase all inner opposition before extinguishing him. We make the brain perfect before we blow it out, he says with unnerving calm. Winston's defiance, already eroded, begins to slip further as O'Brien continues. The party seeks not submission born of fear, but transformation born of belief. It is not enough that the body obeys, the mind must also surrender. This is the essence of the party's terrifying philosophy. Reality is not something external, but something dictated by collective will. A false thought cannot be tolerated, even in the deepest corners of one's consciousness. This idea lies at the heart of total control. To illustrate, O'Brien recounts the fates of Jones, Aronson, and Rutherford, once thought to be innocent. Even they, Winston is told, were completely broken, their spirits reconfigured until all that remained was remorse and adoration for Big Brother. They begged for death not in despair, but in purified loyalty. The party had succeeded in burning out all dissent, replacing it with devotion. Winston, who once believed in their innocence, now sees their fate as a model for his own. The psychological warfare intensifies as O'Brien prepares a new form of manipulation. Winston is warned, even total submission will not save him. What happens in the ministry of love is eternal. No matter what follows, freedom, death, or survival, Winston will never again be capable of love, friendship, curiosity, or courage. He will be hollowed out and filled with the party. This is not merely indoctrination. It is annihilation of the soul. A strange machine is brought forward. Moist pads are placed against Winston's temples. O'Brien, with a softness that mocks the violence of his purpose, tells him the process will not hurt. A burst of light erupts, a painless but devastating jolt. Winston feels as if something essential has been carved out of his mind. He is not physically wounded, but mentally restructured. When asked which nation Oceania is at war with, he cannot recall. His memory is a blank slate. Then, prompted by O'Brien, he begins to accept the new reality. Oceania has always been at war with East Asia. This rewriting of history is not debated, it is imposed. More memories are undone. Winston is told that the photograph he once saw, which proved the innocence of the three men, never existed. He invented it. And now, under the pressure of O'Brien's control, Winston remembers inventing it. He admits it freely, though some part of him still recalls the truth. Even the number of fingers O'Brien holds up becomes fluid. For a moment, Winston genuinely sees 5 fingers when only 4 are shown. He realizes that belief can be bent, that perception itself is malleable. In this fragile state, Winston is granted a short reprieve. O'Brien, now almost friendly, offers Winston the chance to ask questions. Winston, disoriented but still clinging to remnants of his old self, inquires about Julia. O'Brien responds coldly. She betrayed Winston instantly and was converted completely. Her transformation was perfect, he says, devoid of resistance or memory. Then Winston asks the question that truly matters. Does Big Brother exist? O'Brien affirms that Big Brother is real, as the party is real. But when asked if Big Brother exists in the same way Winston does, O'Brien replies, "You do not exist." It is a brutal assertion of dominance, not just over Winston's thoughts, but over his being. When Winston protests that he feels alive, conscious, present in space, O'Brien dismisses his reasoning. Existence is not about logic or physicality. It is about recognition by the party. The questions continue, and Winston asks whether the Brotherhood exists. O'Brien answers with a tantalizing cruelty. Winston will never know. Whether the Brotherhood is real or not, that uncertainty will remain with him forever, unsolvable and maddening. Finally, Winston asks the one question he has feared most. What is in room 101? O'Brien replies without expression. You know what is in room 101, Winston. Everyone knows what is in room 101. It is a moment laden with dread. Room 101 is never described in full. It is left to the imagination, a symbol of ultimate fear. It is the endpoint of the party's method. Not death, not torture, but the confrontation of the self's deepest terror. A final injection is administered. Winston slips into unconsciousness. The session ends, not with a scream, but with a silence that signifies the collapse of resistance. This chapter marks the darkest descent in Winston's journey. No longer is he merely a rebel under pressure. He is a man being erased and rewritten. O'Brien's logic is relentless, his power absolute. He does not need Winston to confess. He needs Winston to believe. The party's control is total not when it silences dissent, but when it plants its voice inside the dissenter's mind. And in that, Orwell shows the ultimate horror, a world where the last frontier of freedom, one's own thoughts, has been colonized. In the dim silence of the Ministry of Love, Winston Smith is no longer just a prisoner. He is a man undergoing a complete unmaking. O'Brien stands over him, face distorted by proximity and intensity, speaking not with anger, but with a kind of sacred conviction. He begins with a statement that echoes throughout the scene. The first thing for you to understand is that in this place there are no martyrdoms. Unlike past regimes, the party does not allow its enemies to die noble deaths. It ensures that no one carries rebellion in their hearts to the grave. The Inquisition, the Nazis, and the Stalinist purges all failed, he explains, because they left behind the seeds of resistance. The party has learned to burn even those seeds. Before it kills, it purifies. Before it destroys, it possesses. This is not simply ideological cruelty, it is methodical erasure. As O'Brien speaks of making the brain perfect before we blow it out, he reveals the party's true ambition. Not to eliminate opposition, but to eliminate the possibility of opposition. Winston, he says, is not being tortured merely for what he's done, but because of who he is, a flaw in the pattern. He must not only surrender, but believe. This distinction lies at the heart of Orwell's nightmare. Submission is not enough. The party demands a transformation of inner reality. In this world, freedom is not forbidden. It is inconceivable. The conversation turns to the idea of historical erasure. O'Brien warns Winston, posterity will never hear of you. There will be no record, no memory, no trace. This is more than death, it is annihilation of self. Winston's despair is not just about the pain or the fear, but about being made into a non-being, someone who never existed. The party's control extends into time itself. It does not just dictate the present, but reshapes the past and defines the future. And yet, the most devastating moment is not when Winston is threatened with death, but when he is told he will never again be capable of love, joy, or friendship. We shall squeeze you empty, and then we shall fill you with ourselves. This is the central horror of Orwell's vision, a world where human feeling has been systemically dismantled. It's not just thoughts that are targeted, but emotions, the soul as it were. The individual is no longer allowed to feel in private. Even laughter, curiosity, and integrity are branded as deviations from party loyalty. When the electroshock process begins, it is not described as pain, but as a kind of a mental rupture. A bright flash, a flattening force, a sudden blankness. Something essential is erased from Winston's mind. In the aftermath, O'Brien tests the damage. What country is Oceania at war with? Winston doesn't know. He accepts O'Brien's correction without question. When O'Brien says Oceania has always been at war with East Asia, Winston agrees. He no longer has access to the reality he once trusted. Even his most cherished memory, the slip of paper that proved the innocence of 3 condemned men, is now understood as an invention. O'Brien tells him, "You remember now the very moment at which you first invented it." And Winston says yes. It is not that he is lying to avoid pain. He is beginning to believe. Memory itself is being rewritten. The most chilling moment of all comes with the fingers. O'Brien holds up 4 fingers and asks, "How many fingers do you see?" Winston, after enduring unbearable torture, finally says 5. But O'Brien insists this isn't enough. Winston must truly believe there are 5, and he does, if only for a moment. A brief, luminous certainty passes through him, during which any number could be true. 2 and 2 could have been 3 as easily as 5. This is Orwell's greatest warning. When power dictates reality, even mathematics can become a tool of control. The mind, once broken, accepts not just absurdity, but whatever is necessary to survive. As Winston lays dazed, O'Brien switches tones. With eerie calm, he offers Winston the chance to ask questions. Winston, clinging to some remnant of identity, asks about Julia. "She betrayed you," O'Brien says, immediately, unreservedly. Her resistance, like his, has been burned away. Her transformation, he says, was perfect. Winston asks if she was tortured. O'Brien doesn't answer, then come the existential questions. Does Big Brother exist? O'Brien affirms that he does. But when asked if Big Brother exists in the same way Winston does, the answer is stark. You do not exist. Here, Orwell strikes at the core of identity. What does it mean to exist? To be remembered? To be known by others? The party denies even this basic philosophical foundation. Winston's own sense of being is meaningless unless it is acknowledged by power. Winston attempts to reason, "I think I exist. I am conscious of my own identity." But O'Brien waves this away. It is irrelevant. The only thing that matters is what the party says. Big Brother exists because the party wills it. Whether Winston exists is not for Winston to decide. He then asks about the Brotherhood, the underground resistance. O'Brien tells him he will never know the answer. As long as you live, it will be an unsolved riddle. This final ambiguity is not simply meant to torment Winston. It is to break the part of him that still seeks meaning. The search for truth becomes a self-defeating act. Finally, Winston voices the question that has haunted him. What is in room 101? O'Brien answers, "You know what is in room 101, Winston? Everyone knows what is in room 101. Orwell does not explain what it is. That silence is intentional. Room 101 is the purest form of fear, the place where the last piece of resistance crumbles. It is different for everyone because it is personal. It is the place where truth no longer matters, because the will to resist is gone. As the session ends and the needle pierces his arm, Winston slips into deep sleep. The transformation is not complete, but it is well underway. He is no longer sure what he remembers, what he believes, or who he is. Through this chapter, Orwell crafts a harrowing meditation on power, memory, identity, and submission. O'Brien is not a sadist in the traditional sense. He is the priest of a secular religion where the only God is power itself. He speaks softly, tortures clinically, and demands not just loyalty, but faith. The lessons are clear and they echo across time. Truth must not only be defended, it must be preserved in the minds of those who live it. Memory left unguarded becomes vulnerable to revision. And the moment we lose the ability to say 2 + 2 make 4, we have lost more than logic. We have lost freedom itself. In a world where even your thoughts can betray you, and love can be replaced with loyalty to a lie, the final act of rebellion is to remember, to feel, to believe, not in what is safe, but in what is true. Orwell shows that the greatest danger is not what power does to the world, but what it does to the soul. And yet, perhaps the most unsettling insight that emerges from this chapter is not only the mechanics of control, but its moral clarity, at least from O'Brien's perspective. He does not see himself as a villain. In his mind, he is not breaking Winston, he is curing him. To cure you, to make you sane, he had said earlier, and now those words echo more darkly. There is no cruelty in his voice, no overt malice. Instead, there is the terrible confidence of a man who believes he is saving another from himself. The question Orwell subtly poses to the reader is, what happens when madness defines itself as sanity? When reality is dictated not by experience, but by decree? In O'Brien's worldview, the individual mind is not a sacred space, but a battleground. Independent thought is a threat not because of what it might say, but because of what it represents. A world where truth is not manufactured. That's why it's not enough to make Winston obey. He must see what the party sees. He must love what the party loves. His heart must be emptied and refilled, perfectly, willingly, irreversibly. There's a particular sadness in Winston's condition, a kind of muted tragedy. His questions toward the end are not those of a rebel, but of a man still hoping for some sliver of honesty, some final proof that the world he once believed in had real edges. He asks if Big Brother exists, if the Brotherhood exists, if Julia resisted. These are not strategic questions. They are emotional ones. The questions of someone reaching out in the dark, hoping to touch something solid. But Orwell denies him even that. O'Brien responds with riddles, half-truths, and silences. You do not exist, he says, not metaphorically, but with philosophical finality. For O'Brien, existence is not about presence or awareness. It is about recognition by the party. Anything outside that framework is dust, vapor, illusion. This is the ultimate redefinition of identity, not who you are, but who you are permitted to be. The betrayal of Julia, delivered so casually, is another deep cut. Winston and Julia once represented the fragile possibility of intimacy, of real human connection in a world determined to stamp it out. Now that thread is severed. O'Brien doesn't need to describe what was done to her. The implication is enough. Julia too was broken, not just subdued, but rewritten. Her love, her rebellion, her spirit, burned away like impurities. What remains is only compliance. Here Orwell shows the terrifying reach of totalitarian love, a love that demands the death of all other loves. Big Brother must be loved exclusively because he is the only approved object of affection. All other loyalties are treason. And what of Room 101? Its mystery is its power. It is not a room, but an experience, the final stage of surrender. Its terror lies in its subjectivity. You know what is in Room 101, O'Brien says. Everyone knows. It is the thing you fear most, the one thing you cannot face. And that is the final weapon. Not the violence itself, but the knowledge that resistance will always shatter against fear. Room 101 is the place where your last defense dies, where you betray what you love, where you accept what you know is false, where your soul in its last moment gives up hope. And Winston, he is not dead yet, but he is drifting. What he believed, what he loved, what he questioned, these things have been dismantled one by one, replaced by hollow affirmations and new certainties. When he sees 5 fingers instead of 4, it is not because he has been tricked. It is because he has been taught to see differently. This chapter offers no escape, no catharsis, no salvation. Orwell does not let Winston rise. He does not allow him to hold on to even the smallest private truth. Instead, he lays bare the psychological machinery of control, the precise, methodical undoing of human dignity. And yet, in this darkness, Orwell leaves a message, not of hope, but of warning. If we do not guard our language, others will redefine our words. If we do not protect memory, others will write our histories. If we do not cherish private thought, others will inhabit our minds. The world of 1984 is not simply a dystopia of the future. It is a cautionary tale of what happens when we allow power to move beyond action and into belief. It is a mirror held up to any society that forgets how fragile freedom is and how easily truth can be bent. The reader finishes this chapter not with triumph, but with a deep silence, a quiet fear. Not because of what was done to Winston, but because of how plausible it all feels. Because we see in O'Brien not just a fictional interrogator, but a type of person who exists in every era. The one who speaks softly as he redefines reality. The one who tortures not for pleasure, but for order. The one who believes that power, if righteous enough, can make even lies sacred. Orwell's lesson is not simply to beware of tyrants. It is to beware of those who would erase the line between tyranny and truth. Let us then remember, while we still can, the difference between what is said and what is real, between obedience and understanding, between the flicker of the screen and the voice of our own hearts. Because if that voice is ever silenced, there will be no one left to remember that 2 + 2 once made 4. Winston once believed that truth lived in memory and that love could outlast fear. But in the end, he saw 5 fingers where there were 4 and thanked the hand that broke him. O'Brien wasn't just a torturer, he was a mirror, a prophet of a world where reality belongs to power. In the next chapter, we follow Winston into Room 101, the place where everyone breaks and no one leaves unchanged. Subscribe now and leave a comment. What would your Room 101 be?